You shout it out, but I can't hear a word you say. I'm talking loud, not saying much. I'm criticized, but how your bullets ricochet. Shoot me down, but I get up. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Far away, ricochet. You take your aim. Far away. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. Cut me down, but it's you who have further to fall. Ghost town, haunted love. Raise your voice. Sticks and stones may break my bones. Talking loud, not saying much. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Far away. Ricochet, you take your aim. Far away. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. Stone heart, machine gun, firing at the ones who run. Stone heart, those bulletproof glass. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am
Hi everyone. I think we're just gonna give maybe people one more minute. People are starting to stream in, so let's just wait another minute and then we're gonna start soon. So today's session is going to be 2 hours. We do have a 10 minutes break in between, but if you wanted to go grab a glass of water, go to the restroom, that would be a perfect time.
Feeling like a drop in the ocean that don't nobody notice. Maybe it's all just in your head. Feeling like you're trapped in your own skin, and now your body's frozen. Broken down, you've got nothing left. When you're high on emotion and you're losing your focus and you feel too exhausted to pray. Don't get lost in the moment or give up when you're closest. All you need is not to be okay. It's okay not to be okay. When you're down and you feel ashamed. It's okay not to be okay. Feeling like your life's an illusion, and lately you're secluded, thinking you'll never get your chance.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are truly grateful for the really amazing turnout. Today's workshop is actually jointly brought to you by 500 Startups and ADB Ventures, and it's separated into two parts. So please stay with us throughout this 2-hour session, because I'll guarantee you it'll be an afternoon chock full of insights and hopefully some inspiration. My name is Ling, and I'm the Southeast Asia lead for innovation and partnerships at 500 Startups. Please let me start off by sharing a little bit more about who we are, who 500 Startups is. 500 Startups is the most active early stage investor in the world, according to PitchBook. For the last decade, we have been building an incredible global network of founders, investors, universities, foundations, and corporates that have enabled us to achieve these remarkable results. We have over 2,400 portfolio companies and growing daily, investments in 78 countries, more than 5,000 active founders within our network, more than 250 expert mentors around the world, and we've invested in about 19 unicorns so far in our portfolio. We're also a leader in startup accelerators. We have over a decade of experience in running our own programs and white label programs in more than 16 countries, and we've accelerated over 1,500 startups. In Asia, we've run our startup programs in Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, delivering Silicon Valley-style structured curriculum adapted to local contexts, and providing mentorship by world-class mentors who are previously successful founders who've been there and done that. So really at 500 Startups, our mission is to uplift people and economies through entrepreneurship. And we have been fortunate to see our mission's importance come to life now more than ever during this time of change. We've been working with companies, cities, and nations around the world to run entrepreneurship and innovation initiatives to help them maintain economic relevance, diversify economic base, and create new sustainable opportunities for growth. So I'm not joking, and I'm not taking this really lightly when I say that today's topic on building thriving startup ecosystems.
I want you all to reflect on this scenario. So assume that this is the phone you're.
That always happens. Well, today's topic, I'm not kidding when I say that it's actually something that 500 startups live and breathe, building thriving startup ecosystems globally. In fact, a big majority of the team are actually startup founders ourselves or have worked in or with startups throughout our career. So if we take a pause really and think, why build startup ecosystems now? We're living in a new reality where how we engage with each other socially, how we buy products and services, and even how we work and learn have all been radically disrupted. We are now facing disruption to our existing economic pillars and seeing the acceleration of digital transformation combined with a remote workforce where anyone can work from anywhere. And these moments demand leaders to navigate us through economic diversification, job creation, and the attraction and retention of new talent and capital. In fact, I think now more than ever, we must help our regions think beyond recovery and set the course towards growth and prosperity. So now that we've identified that startup ecosystems, sit at the intersection of business, economic, and community development, the other common questions that we always get is, what is the success matrix of building a startup ecosystem, right? What are the key measurements of a startup ecosystem? People always ask us, how do you know if a startup ecosystem is thriving? What tools do they use? I'm going to actually introduce the tools that we use at the end of this hour. But first, I want to walk through a couple of key measurements. So as VCs ourselves, we often use something that we call the 5 Ts in order to measure whether or not a startup is something that we want to invest in. In this case, in terms of startup ecosystems, we've actually identified 6 key maturity factors that we review really with ecosystem builders whenever we enter a new ecosystem, so that we can better understand where this ecosystem is in terms of maturity, and how can we be additive rather than duplicative to their efforts. So for me, this is going to be a lot of information, but don't worry, we will start doing some ideation towards the end of this session. But this really, I think, helps set the context as to what are some of the levers that we look at when evaluating whether or not a startup ecosystem is mature. And you can also take this into consideration when thinking about how would you design your startup ecosystem. So 6 steps here. First and foremost, startup density and risk propensity. How do we measure this? We measure this by the number and the growth of early stage startups funded at the seed or Series A stages. The speed at which the startups emerge and actually exit the ecosystem. So historically, it used to be 10 years for early startups to actually reach exit, but now in some ecosystems, the timeline has been compressed. Secondly, the propensity for them to actually access global markets and sell to global customers. We also look at the number of serial entrepreneurs because that's an indication that people in the country believe that the ecosystem will continue to provide opportunities, and hence they're willing to keep taking a plunge into entrepreneurship. Secondly, we look at exits and case studies. So the frequency of exit at a certain threshold, because we believe that if the talent funnel exists, investors and capital will come. Thirdly, we look at visionaries and allies. Now, you might think that this refers to, your Elon Musk equivalent or Jack Ma equivalent, but really what we're talking about is policy actions that help startups succeed. So these are wraparound services like training and mentorship. So mentors is really one of the biggest visionaries and allies that a founder can have. The other things include physical resources like co-working spaces, business incentive, and other beneficial policies like even bankruptcy protection. So what we also look at is the quality of the connections. It's not just the number of connections that's made between visionaries. And how do we measure this? We look at ecosystem maps and social network analysis to inform that. Fourthly, capital and connections. Now, this is probably one of the most intuitive ones that a lot of people can think of. Now, however, many ecosystems have later stage investors. Why? Well, because the risk is less. And investors at a later stage know that the speed to exit is quicker. Remember, we talked about early stage needing 10 years. So if you come in at a later stage, obviously the exit pathway is slightly shorter. Very few ecosystems have very savvy early stage investors who know how to actually support early stage startup with terms that enable growth and not cripple the startups. That's why we bring in investor education programs that help to target this segment. So early stage investors generally refer to angel investor networks, family offices, investing arms. And we also look at how well connected these networks are. We measure these connections by looking at the volume of early stage funding, the average funding per startup, and also the funding growth number. In fact, the other thing we look at is also the number of local investors experience, how active they are and how many years have they been investing. Fifth is policy and regulations. So more mature ecosystems think creatively about the ways to attract talent through enabling policies. Some of the enabling policies are probably some that you're familiar with. And I know that a lot of the people in the audience here come from different countries in Asia. And so the maturity of the different nations is of course very different. And hence you might see some of these policies in your country already. So some of the popular ones are promotion of immigration visas, creating an entrepreneur in residence secondment program so that they bring the best entrepreneurs into town for a year. They make it easier for startups to contract with the government. So for example, in Singapore, IMDA actually creates a system where they onboard and pre-onboard actually companies with good technologies that can serve as vendors to the other companies in Singapore. Some governments also set up innovation sandboxes, regulatory sandboxes, as well as tax exemptions. And finally, we look at talent and tech diversity. So we always hear this. People say that an ecosystem is not mature because there's not enough capital. But actually, it's chicken and egg. The capital will be here if there are startups there to actually attract capital. And just remember this, ideas don't need massive funding to get it off the ground. What ideas need is mentors, quality mentors, and a really, really good experimentation process. So things that a great mentor network can help. So, statistically, startups that have helpful mentors, they track their metrics effectively, and they actually raise 7 times more money and have 3.5 times better user growth than those who don't have a mentor network. We also measure the number of patents that's actually, recorded and signed up for in a certain country. And we also look at the number of partnerships and diversity in terms of technology talent in a certain city or region. Okay, so that is really your 6 ways in which we measure the maturity of a startup ecosystem. Now, I started off by talking about really generic analysis of the 6 ways to measure a startup ecosystem maturity, right? Let's take it one step further and talk about inclusive startup ecosystems. Before we go forth though, I do want to make a caveat. When we talk about inclusive and diverse ecosystems, it covers not just gender, but also race and income levels and abilities. But for today's purposes, today's discussion, we are going to be focused specifically on female founders. It's not that the rest are not important, it's just that that's something that we just chose to focus on today, gender inclusivity, and what's needed to create an equitable ecosystem for female founders. So at the start of this year, a famous VC said this at a TechCrunch event. He said, "My fear is that as investors become more conservative and cautious, they will gravitate towards the networks that they know well. They will go back to the schools that they went to, the people that they know and they're comfortable with. And that generally is not female founders and not people of color." Anyone wants to guess if his premonition came true? Well, sadly, it did. So VC rounds into female-founded startups and co-founded startups actually fell by 36% in Q3 2020, 36% compared to the same period last year. I know what you guys are thinking. You're saying it's COVID-19, obviously funding has fell, but that's not true. It is not due to COVID-19 because overall funding in startups was up by 22%. So again, mull upon this, right? Total US funding in VCs hit a 7-quarter high, but female founders raised lesser amount. Go figure. And another mind-blowing number, last year, female founders received 7.1% of venture deals. This was in Q1 2019. In the same period this year, Q1 2020, women founders received only 4.3% of venture deals. 4.3% of venture deals went to female founders. Now, why is this important? Why do we need to talk about creating gender-inclusive ecosystems? The numbers make sense. So we always have to talk statistics, right? Numbers do make sense. BCG had found that for every dollar of investment raised, female-run startups generated 78 cents in revenue, whereas male-run startups generated 31 cents. In fact, first-round capital found that the female-founded companies it funded performed 63% better than the all-male founding teams it funded. But let's not talk about numbers. I think what really resonates more with me is this. In general, women and minority founders often come up with ideas that are created on the basis of their personal experience. And we need this diversity. The example I always like to mention to anyone who will listen is actually breast pumps. I know what you're thinking, but if any of you here are moms, or who have seen a breast pump before, those are not made for working women. And only in 2014, during an MIT hackathon that was designed to redesign tools for nursing moms, was something called the Willow breast pump created. This is now a new age breast pump that you can insert in your bra, and it's perfect for working moms who can continue feeding while they are at work. And so it's really because of this very reason that I think we need to really look at affirmative actions, and supporting and creating an equitable ecosystem for female founders. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to launch a poll. And don't worry, this is going to be anonymous. And so I want you guys to look at this poll in front of your screen right now. Have any of these statements ever crossed your mind? Or have you ever heard any of these statements being said? Maybe it's by someone else saying it to your daughter, or maybe you heard it when you were a little girl or a little boy. Okay, I'm just going to give everyone a couple of seconds or minutes to vote on this one. And if it's none of the above, it's fine as well. So let's see. Okay. Now, what I wanted to share there earlier on is that even when we say that we are very open-minded and not prejudiced, these biases actually creep up on us. Some gender biases are reinforced from a really young age, and these biases become challenges in a woman's career advancement. So enough about me talking. I've actually invited two female founders today to share about the challenges and the conscious or unconscious biases that they face. So I would now like to welcome So-Young Kang, the CEO and founder of Gnowbe. Gnowbe is a micro-learning platform that's disrupting the future of talent and work through a mobile-first employee experience solution. They empower organizations to develop their people at a speed and scale for higher performance. Secondly, I have Francesca Chia, who is the CEO and co-founder of GoGet. GoGet is an on-demand workforce technology that has expanded to service businesses that hire gig workers, and they've also expanded into a platform for companies to utilize and manage and digitize their manual workforce processes. Hi, Francesca. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm not sure if I can see So-Young.
Oh, I just turned my camera on.
Oh, hey, So-Young. Yeah, we can see you as well. Perfect. Okay. So thank you so much, you both, for actually joining me here today. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion that we're going to have. That's going to be really candid, might, ruffle a little bit of feathers. But I remember this when I first spoke to So-Young and I said, So-Young, please be really honest and upfront about the challenges that we face. And So-Young, I remember your answer clearly. You said, why wouldn't I? And I think that's really the basis of our conversation today. So to set the tone, I think, to make sure it all ties in with the elements of startup ecosystem, we're going to cover at least 3 of the elements. We'll talk about capital and connections, visionaries and allies, and also tech talent. So So-Young, let's talk about fundraising. When we spoke about this before, you actually highlighted a couple of questions that you were getting from investors. And so can you share your experience, in fundraising, from getting meetings to the questions that are being asked? How has unconscious bias actually manifested itself in these situations?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad that we're doing this. So yeah, I love the whole topic. I'm taking notes as well. And all of your stats, if you could share them, I think it would be great. I couldn't tweet them fast enough, but I think they're really important for you to share, for all of us to share, because I think it's quite shocking when you see the numbers. So when I was fundraising, this is my second company, I have good networks. So, I was fundraising, and I knew a lot of, I have friends who are on the investor venture space as well. So I just assumed that I would be getting asked the same kinds of questions because of me, the founder, not because of my gender. And so I read an article, then I came across this article that basically shared the types of questions that male founders get asked and the type of questions that female founders get asked. I got so pissed. I was so pissed off because all of the questions on the female list were ones that I had gotten asked. And they were things that basically start with this unconscious bias of you prove yourself. You lovely young thing. You have a good idea? Oh, how cute. Why don't you prove to me why you can run this company? They don't say that. They never say that. But it's very subtle in the types of questions they ask. And 1 out of probably about 100 investors I spoke to asked me the male question. And the first time he asked me, I was so floored by this question. I was really unprepared. So I kicked myself later. So he asked me, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so used to defending myself. I'm so used to being on the defensive of proving myself, of proving my value. I didn't know how to answer the question. And so what I did is after reading the article, I started to answer the questions that are on the male list. And I thought about how I would answer those questions. And so what I try to do when I talk to investors, and I don't do it all the time either, because sometimes it's really hard. Like I think with women, when you ask women a question, she actually answers that question directly. I notice that sometimes when you ask a male a question, he may not answer the question, but people are so satisfied with the answer. And I mean, meaning like not very directly. So I've started to try to practice answering the questions I want to answer that give big picture vision of what I'm trying to build versus always coming from more of a defensive perspective. That's just one of many examples, but there are actually quite a lot, unfortunately.
Great that you mentioned that. I mean, I actually saw that, most times female founders are actually they even have to prove that they know what they're talking about. They're often tested, and we're often tested on whether we actually know the tech stack. We understand the technology behind the creations that we're coming out with, and men never get asked that. Francesca, yeah, sorry, So-Young.
No, yeah. I'm just agreeing with you.
Francesca, so first of all, congrats on your recent fundraise. So this is totally timely. Can you share your experience in accessing and obtaining funding?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's obviously a very important topic that I think all of us here feel very passionate about. And it's great to have a very open and honest discussion. I think we just need more of it. But particularly in terms of fundraising and my personal experience, I think just setting the scene, it is fundamentally, I definitely pitch to 99% of people would be male, and the 1% is female. So firstly, in terms of the person sitting across this table, when you're pitching for a VC fund, it's very rare you pitch to females. So that's why I think the key word you've used here is the subconscious or the unconscious bias. Is really not an active bias, but I also, because you can completely understand and see how there's a knock-on effect if statistically men have to then pitch in front of men, and that's most of the time. But then if a girl has to pitch or a female has to pitch in front of the men, then I feel the dynamics and the differences is definitely there, right? And I think So-Young's done a really great job actually explaining even the type of question changes. For me personally, I've seen in terms of chemistry and being able to connect. So fundamentally, there is a need when you want to build trust with a VC for them to say, oh, I really get along with this person. I like being in a room with this person so that we can have a conversation. To get that, you also want a chemistry professionally. And I've had moments where genuinely, it was a period of time when I was fundraising and it was the middle of the journey and I said, wow, I think there was a moment where I would consciously go, should I bring my male co-founder in the next meeting? Because usually I am the main fundraising founder because I run the business, whereas the second, my other co-founder runs the tech. So he's a little bit more in the back office. But I consciously actually make a question myself on the second meeting. After I get to know one person, I go, would this guy be better and more comfortable if Feng, who's my male founder, pitches and answers some of the questions? Because for some reason, sometimes when Feng says the exact same thing, for some reason, it's easier for them to understand. And I don't know whether it's, again, the way, even subconsciously how I'm communicating it just doesn't click. And again, it's maybe because there's a different kind of wavelength. I think I've said this before to you as well, but male, when it starts really simple from young, right? There's been a study that shows when boys in the playground play, they play in the form of, I can throw a ball higher than you. And then another boy will go, I can throw a ball higher than the swing. And then they keep going. And that's how they build connection. But for females, we build connections, for example, through, oh, your mother wears glasses. Oh, my mother wears glasses too. We build connections to almost finding common ground, as opposed to building on a higher, saying that I can throw the ball higher. There are sometimes certain ways in which females create connections and how males create connections. So that's where I see genuinely it does impact actually how I create a connection with a VC. I may make a call actually where I have to go, wow, I think I have to bring my co-founder in to see if he can get it better.
I totally hear you. I think just to double back on one of the things you said, which is statistics, right? In the US itself, less than 10% of checks are written by women. And I think it's really important that what we're also trying to say here is that this is not a witch hunt, but it's a step towards acknowledging that there's unconscious bias. And then what steps can we take to actually fix that, right? It's natural for people to look for common grounds and connections. And so how do we just put steps in place? And we'll get to that later. Also wanted to share that, I too have a male co-founder. And what I've always realized in many things is that I come across as the one who's totally passionate about the business. I really want to make an impact. I really believe in the change that the business can create. But when it comes to like the visioning, 5 years down the road, they turn to the male founder. Where are you taking this? Yeah, how many students are you going to educate? I think there's some questions here around communication and training. And I think some of these things is definitely what we're going to talk about as well. How do we train females to actually step up or even adapt communication styles as well, right? I think one of the things that we spoke about before as well was that during your pitch, do you then deliberately put up statistics and facts and numbers and hit them with those numbers first before talking about your why or your purpose? So I think,
just sorry to interrupt, but just I think the communications and the training has to be on both sides, not just for women. I think it can't, it's just not women. I think women are so used to, we're quite good at adapting, I think, to men. I think that
Or the other way around.
it has to go both ways because we're so used to it. We already adapt all the time. Like we adapt like 90% of the time because we're always in male dominated. So I feel like in these conversations, I'd love to see, you know, men also raising consciousness. And so for the men who are on this call, right? And how can we adapt and be more conscious both ways? So sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
No, I love that and totally agree.
Correct.
Great message there. On this next note, you know, I think So-Young, we talked about this and about networking, right? So talking about visionaries and allies, and we spoke about how in today's world, it's still really true that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I've heard two differing views on this. So some women have said that the majority of business world is still dominated by men, it's true. And that it's hard to get introductions and connections into the more elite business networks. And others say it's not really the case. And it's actually a case of how you network and how you connect instead. So yeah, I'm really curious about this because you went to Harvard Business School. So you should have access to an elite network. How has your experience been?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think networks are critical in life. Whether you're male, female, you know, tall, short, you know, networks are matter. And I think there's different kinds of networks and communities. The 500 Startups is a community network. And I think it is important. And I see all of these networks and communities keys. And so what you want to do is have keys because these keys allow you to go in the door. But once you get in the door, it's up to you to perform once you get in the door, right? And so I think sometimes to be shameless and to even be pretty intentional about building those networks and really asking people for their time, I think is really, really important. It's been very critical. You know, I have my business networks, my professional networks that I literally will save people. Like if I meet you once, you're in my database, you know, and it's up to us to consciously build that database. I have over 11,000 contacts, right? And personal contacts in my personal Gmail. And I'm constantly adding thousands and thousands to them. Why do I do that? And I stay connected with them because at some point in life is it's not just one moment, right? You want to build reputation and network and relationships over decades. And as you build those, you never know when you can be of help to someone else or they can be of help to you. So I encourage people to really be very intentional. And you don't have to be outgoing. You don't have to be like a party person. It's just building authentic relationships. And I always like to tell people, like, just be of use. If you are of use, if you're basically networking because you want to always get something from someone else, they kind of know. And that, for me, that's ineffective networking. Networking is not about getting a bunch of business cards. I think it's about building human connections and being of use so that when you might need something in the future, may or may not, then they'll be willing to take your call.
Francesca, I think you bring a different perspective, and it has to do with how you train to network in your earlier days as a consultant, right?
Yeah, for
so
sure.
What are your thoughts around that? And also
So
maybe let's talk about adapting as well then. Do we adapt one way or two ways?
So that's a great segue. Essentially, for some people's background, I came from a corporate background where networking professionally in a corporate setting was part of the job, and it was very male dominated as well. So I previously worked in the Boston. Oh, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I worked in previously the Boston Consulting Group, where then networking would be with CEOs of very large MNCs or Fortune 500. And then flip side, I also then started GoGet, and then networking would be very different because on one side, with the professional world, there was a lot to do with actually tenure experience would be very important. Whereas in the startup world, I did feel a huge difference in terms of actually instead of tenure, it was tenacity. It was whether you had an interesting idea, and it doesn't matter if you're 21 years old. So I felt, interestingly enough, actually, and it doesn't matter if you were, I had less gender bias, I believe, in the startup ecosystem because it's so nascent versus the old boys club sometimes in the professional corporate world for Fortune 500 companies. And so for my take was actually how then I had to be trained on how to handle the boys club. So in BCG, we actually do get training, not only on essentially how you communicate, how as a female also, but they train males too. I think this is to the point of training just now. even what we wear, to also how we hold ourselves in the event. And I think this is because we're trying to fight the subconscious bias, right? And if we're trying to actively take some actions, it's sometimes training the old dog some new tricks. And for me, I think what I found though, out of all the tricks, it wasn't actually what I wore, it wasn't actually what I had trained on how to stand on a certain way. Actually, it was time. So I used to work in a iron mining company where majority of people would be 50 years and above, and they were white males. And I was a 21-year-old Asian girl, 22, I think. So there was very little to legitimacy in that room. But if I could constantly be the person that answered with accurate data and information whenever they asked for it, I would slowly break down the barriers, and it took time. So I genuinely believe time and consistency are the only two things that break down stereotypes, and you just have to be consistent. I do think it's also a role for females or males to make sure you are persistent in showing that message you want to display to people consistently. If you're trying to show females can be in the workforce, you have to deliver consistently with professionalism. But you cannot also go in and out and also maybe not be reliable one day. That also has an issue to us breaking down stereotypes. So I think it's about time and consistency that's really helped me.
Great. I mean, I think I'm really very assured hearing both of you kind of say that in the startup world, in terms of forming networks and connections, ultimately it's still authenticity that matters the most. I think one thing I do want to share though is that when we talk about access to mentors and to coaches, one thing as well is that we need to actively build up more female mentors, more female coaches, and to that certain aspect, it's actually conscious allocation and measurement as well. I mean, for us when we run programs, I mean, for me and my startup, when I run programs, I really allot at least 50% of seats and opportunities to female founders, mentors, and judges, because I believe that that's really what people need to see. So as a young girl in particular, seeing that there are female representation out there, that's something that, a step that we can do. I want to kind of move on to this other topic. We recently ran, 500 female forces, ran a survey with 199 female founders. And apart from fundraising, of course, and cash flow, one of the top challenges that they said they face is balancing care at home with work. So the United Nations actually reports that women do an average of 75% of the world's unpaid care work. And this includes, childcare, it includes caring for the elderly, cooking and cleaning. And now I know the both of you don't have kids, but Francesca, you shared with me a really interesting story about seeing this and also how this has shown up amongst your female peers or your employees. So how has this part about, imbalance in terms of unpaid care work actually show up in your life?
Yeah. I think it's a very, very clear statistic. I don't think anyone can debate that. I think also I've seen it personally with some of my friends who've actually just had babies and then they've also started to run their own company. It's a huge struggle. It's also not, it's not that also the relationship is intending that the first 6 months a baby is fundamentally biologically a lot more dependent on the mother in terms of feeding. Right. And it's not like you can completely outsource that equally 50 parts with your husband. Right. So we have to also be very conscious of that. And I think it's a huge challenge for females. For me, though, I think where I saw this as a huge eye opener was, for example, my friend whose husband was to say, well, I assume that actually, yeah, she would take care of majority of the care. And part of that to me fundamentally is actually not this man's entire fault. He was raised in a family where the mother was the home carer. So it's monkey see, monkey do. If I'm raised in a family where the female's place really is in home, I expect that I would marry someone and that's actually what I know. I've not seen it anywhere else. I'm sorry. And so, and I realized this because I was once at another female event and just so happened, this is by pure chance, but my mother was actually another speaker in the exact same conference, but no one knew that we were related. actually, because we don't look alike. She's very fair and I'm not, but and she was the speaker. And when it came to my time to be on the panel, my panel topic was specifically at around 30 to 35. Majority of middle managers of females tend to actually leave the working force to have a child. And there's a huge gap. So actually the gender bias of 50-50 is not so bad at fresh grad. It actually completely drops off around middle management when people want to have a child around 30. And this specific event that I went to, it would be held every year because this company recognized that this would be the year that they will all leave. And so they actually have events to actually go, let's talk about it before you make your decision to leave. And they invited a startup founder, they invited a husband, they invited another female speaker, and they would actually talk about your choice. And in this event, one of the ladies was saying, how can I be there for my child if I am not physically there? I will not be able to help my child, and if I have to go to work. And then I really had to share it there to say, because I didn't know I was coming from such a 1% perspective, but I actually stood up and I said, I'm going to be really honest. The previous speaker was my mother. And actually, I did not realize that I grew up in a family where all I knew was that females do work. That is actually their natural place at work. I didn't understand that that was actually, females can actually just be at home and just take care of. That wasn't what I saw. So again, I was monkey see, monkey do. So I was like, I just want to let you know that actually by you not being there physically for your child, you're actually being there for them by saying that females can contribute to the economy and they can be part of and do and dream and also work and contribute and add value to society. You are genuinely showing them that. So I think it's a very societal problem. It's not that these husbands are making females work more as a caregiver. It's also, do the mothers know that they're sending examples to the next generation? Because that's what the next generation sees. And can you as mothers, whatever you choose, and there's no right or wrong, make sure that you're sending the message, because people are going, your child is going to see that as that is where my place should be, or that is where my contribution can be like.
So to any working mom on the call who's feeling guilty, this is validation that you don't have to feel guilty. But I think more importantly, the message that we want to kind of send is really, you have the power to make the choice, and whatever choice it is that you make, you just need to be comfortable with it. We're not telling you one way is better than the other. What we're saying is make a conscious choice that you are happy with and feel fulfilled with.
And it's so important to know that whatever you choose, that's what you're giving as an example to them.
Okay, so now finally, we've been, I wish we really had more time for this, but we're now on the final topic, and we want to, we're hearing some background noise. Okay, we've been talking about female founders, but actually there's a disproportion in the number of female in tech and engineering at all levels in a firm. And we know that having diversity in background and experience pays off for a firm. So where do you think this gender gap in STEAM started? And I think you can kind of see where we're going to, right? So Yang, you're in education, so maybe we'll start with you. Where do you think the gender gap in STEAM started?
Yeah, well, actually, interestingly enough, if you guys have not read the book Rotopia, I highly recommend you read it because it does talk about where this gender gap, at least in Silicon Valley, started. In fact, I will post later a program that I created on the back of Me Too. Gnowbe, it's a free program for everyone on how to foster gender inclusive cultures, which goes a little bit into both the history of where this happened, but also more importantly, it goes into unconscious bias. It's not just for women, it's for men as well. And I'll give you some exercise in there to basically help raise your consciousness, because I'm an educator at heart and I love to train. But where it came from, I think, when you read the book, it really was basically based on research. I'm not going to bore you with the details of where it started, I think, but more importantly, I think we should just recognize that it exists. There is a model for tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley that has been perpetuated over and over again by being the white male geek techie guy who knows technology, right? And so let's just call it what it is. We can debate, where it came from, blah, blah, blah. But more importantly, I think it's, what do we do with those biases? How do we educate ourselves on what exists and start to really change the mold? And I think in Asia, and I think one of the things I find Asia is much less gender biased than Silicon Valley. I've experienced the most gender discrimination in Silicon Valley, and I have not really experienced as much of it in Asia. So I do think that we have an opportunity in Asia. We are more more balanced. We're still not in balance, like in terms of but there's more to build off of. And so I think for us, I mean, as a female founder and a tech founder, I think, how do we basically educate ourselves on what are those questions that males are being asked? How do we prepare ourselves to tell different kinds of stories? How do we influence the narrative to our advantage? Right. And so, we should play to win. I think as a tech founder, we play to win, right? We're not doing this because we're bored and, it's a lot of work, a lot of late nights. But how do we basically understand the rules of the game? All of this is basically like the rules of the game. And so if we're going to play this game, for men and women, how do we learn those rules and then basically equip ourselves to play the game? And so of course, as a woman, we have to be smarter, faster, better, like perform higher achievement, and it sucks. And so like, how do we, but there's a whole ecosystem and there's so many things required to start taking, right? We're not going to change all of that. But I think, how do we individually play part and then collectively, by having these kind of conversations, raise like collective consciousness?
Thanks, So Young. What about you, Francesca? Any thoughts around where the gender gap started in tech talent?
Yes. So I have a specific view here, but not everyone must agree. But I genuinely believe that pipeline obviously already starts off bad, right? We have a very, like, we interview we try to get developers, but there's one female applicant to 40 resumes that we get, right? It's very, very low. And it even stems back to what kind of engineering, right? And then people finding it comfortable and easy to kind of do that subject. And I actually believe it even gets rooted in, again, a societal problem. That's why it's such a unconscious bias done by female and male. But when you're a young child and you give a boy a truck and you give a girl a Barbie doll, she naturally sees aesthetics and he naturally starts playing with mechanisms and physics. So when it comes to science, I actually think that's why also men just feel a little bit more, if I played around with it since young, it just becomes a bit easier. If you push it and then the force moves it and then it goes forward, I find that a little bit easier for me to understand. Right. And so I think it actually stems even from the early days of gifting your toys to your children, to then the education that then they feel more comfortable to be successful. And as a child, if I get an A in it, I'll do more of that instead of the one that I currently get D's in. And then you just get less and less people going to engineering. And then I have less and less people to hire as female developers. And then it's such a rooted problem.
Yeah, sorry to disagree here, Francesca, but the data actually doesn't show that. So 50% of university students are studying engineering. So if you look at data, females are studying it at the same rate. So I think that so they're getting into university with these degrees. I think the problem is happening when they're entering the workforce. So I agree.
And how they do that.
Right. So I agree with you that probably was the case. But I think now we're doing a better job where like students graduating, like half of them are women. And
is this in America?
I think this was a global study, but yeah, but it definitely, the data has shifted. I don't know. I haven't looked at Asia specifically, right? And the bigger problem is after they start to work and what's happening in the workplace and how they're basically not getting promoted, they're not getting recognized and like not being included. There's so many things happening once they start working. And I agree with you in some cultures that agree that, but I get shocked when I see the numbers, because I would have expected to see then like 80% males in engineering, and 20% women, but I'm not seeing that. And that makes me.
Yeah, so I'm actually, so the data that I see, I mean, when we talk statistics, this is Australia, so 35% of degrees are issued in STEM are issued to women, but you are right, So Young, the issue comes out because more of them drop out and don't actually pursue a career in the degree that they took. However, what worries me though is that I teach young kids. And when I see these young kids, I mean, my daughter is 11. She joined a robotics CCA in school, and she said, "Mommy, all the other kids are boys. I'm the only girl in the club." And so she enjoyed it because I said, "Well, is that a problem?" And she's like, "No, I like it." But the thing is, she did not re-enroll the next semester. So I think that's something that at a younger age as well, we also need to be conscious about it. And to be honest, as a teacher myself as well, I have seen statistics where teachers do play a part as well in instilling some of these gender biases. Okay, so now we're really up on time. So I just want to wrap up, and I'd like to ask each of you to provide, I guess, one suggestion on how you think we can make the startup ecosystem more equitable for women. It can be from capital, as we discussed. It can be from, education. Take your pick. One suggestion to all the audiences here who have the power of making a change.
I would say just more open communication. So I don't know whether it's potential for you to either start conversations within your teams, or start conversations within your within the men and female, even in the office or in your departments, and really bring out the topics. I feel us as a human race, we or even as a lot of people in the companies, they have a genuine desire to improve the situation. It's just that we need to almost lay out the situation and put it onto the table so that we can have active conversation. Too often it's just not spoken about. And I've said this before, most of the females, if they choose to leave because of their family requirements, is because they feel that, the current setup for the office does not allow them to have a child and also work. But there have been moments where Google has changed the way they run things because a female had to stand up and go, I need to do this while I'm work. Can you give me a baby room to nurse? And that required a female to actually speak up and have a conversation. Google didn't have baby rooms before, right? Or a nursing room, but now they do because someone had to have the conversation. So people have to recognize that if your room is square, it doesn't have to be square. It could be a circular room, but you need to speak up so someone knows to change it to a circular room.
Yeah, I love what you said, and I totally agree. So I won't repeat that. I'll add something else because that was such a good point. I think maybe I'll speak from the position of those who are running companies as bosses or managers or leaders. I think that one thing that we can do really as employers is to really give females time and space. So for example, like I don't care where you work. You can work from home, you can work different hours. So giving flexibility in terms of how people are working so that they don't have to be constrained if they have other things that they need to do. They might put their kids to bed or make dinner and then they work later or whatever it is. I find that working mothers are amazing. They're like probably the most productive humans I've ever met in the world. And so it's also like in terms of expectation and communication, giving space for your employees that it's okay that they are doing things and caretaking, if men and women. I think it's open for both, right? That it's okay that they can manage their time and that they're trusted to manage their time in such a way, as long as they get their work done. How they want to do it is up to them. And giving a lot more like flexibility, I think, is really important as an employer. And then also to really actively encourage our female staff to speak up. Very similar to what Francesca was saying. I find so many young, talented women who are not bold. They don't ask for things. They just wait for things to be given. So in fact, I coach them on how to ask for promotions and raises, even though I have to pay it. Like I want them to, because I want them to be confident of their abilities and to believe in themselves. Because I think the more we can get women to believe in themselves and stand up, things will change, because they'll be asking for the round room, not the square room, right? Like that Francesca said. So I think it's really about how do we empower the women that are around us, encourage more, and then give them flexibility. And don't use the same rules on everyone, right? And let them have different kinds of rules, but even have the conversation that I need a different rule, because they may not even know that it's available to them as an option. And so like, I think being proactive in creating that, I think hopefully as employers, we can start changing the game for our employees and encourage them to start companies, right? Or, or pursue the things that they're awesome at.
Great, thank you so much. And I think just to capture that all, especially as we talk about capital raising as well, if there are any investors in the room, even just standardizing your list of questions that you ask male and female founders, regardless, right, is even a step. And we'll talk a little bit more about how do we create equitable, diversified and inclusive ecosystem shortly. So thank you so much, Francesca and So Young, for this insightful sharing. I think you've definitely been really inspiring, and I thank you for being so candid and open and honest.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So to everyone here, don't leave just yet, okay? What we're going to do now is we're going to enter into a really rapid ideation session. So you've all heard about the challenges and you know the tools and levers to present in the startup ecosystem. So now, what steps can we take together to build a gender inclusive startup ecosystem? There's going to be a few things to think about. And so we've started by actually creating this couple of how might we statements, 7 different how might we statements. And we'd like you to just really very rapidly think about what you can do in your ecosystem. How are we going to do this? Okay, this is always the problem. Can someone stop annotating on my screen? Thank you so much. Okay, we'll actually be randomly assigning you to breakout rooms. We're just going to do this very quickly, 8 minutes. Once you're in the breakout room, you will see the title of your room. So it says, how might we 1 to 7? And then once you're in your breakout room, please join that breakout room. And when you're in the breakout room, go to the chat in Zoom and you'll see the links that we pasted there. So we've actually created Jamboard links that you can go in and create sticky notes on. So if you look in the chat now, we've shown how might we 1, how might we 2, how might we 3. So depending on your breakout room, just open the Jamboard correspondingly. When you are in the breakout room itself, oops, sorry about that. Okay, now this is a participant-driven session. There's no facilitators because there's so many of you. So once you're in the room, I hope that there's going to be a natural leader who emerges to drive the discussion. Please use the sticky note, on the left-hand side to add your ideas. We'll just spend 7 minutes here. And once you come back, I'll hopefully call on some people to share the top idea that they came up with. So with that, we are going to open the breakout rooms and hopefully you guys have some fun ideating. But if you're not participating, do come back at 4:40 p.m. Singapore time because we will kickstart the next session then. Well, to all of you who are still here in the main room with us, waiting for the next session, don't worry. I get that we're all a bit fatigued with Zoom. I'm just going to play you guys some music.
to be okay. It's okay not to be okay. When you're down and you feel ashamed, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to be okay. 'Cause I'm in the stars tonight. So watch me bring the fire, set the night light. Shoes on, get up in the morning, cup of milk, let's rock and roll. King Kang, kick the drum, rolling on like a rolling stone. Sing song when I'm walking home, jump up to the top of the brown. Ding dong, call me on my phone, nice tea and I'll get my ping pong. This is getting heavy, can't hear the bass, boom, I'm ready. Life is sweet as honey, yeah, this beat treat like money. This go overload, I'm into that, I'm good to go, I'm diamond, you know I glow up. Hey, so let's go. 'Cause I'm in the stars tonight, so watch me bring the fire, set the night light. Hey, shining through the city with a little funky soul. So I'ma light it up like dynamite. Whoa, bring a friend, join the crowd, whoever wanna come along. Word up, talk, just move right up the wall. Day or night, sky's the light, so we dance to the breakdown. Ladies and gentlemen, I got the medicine, so you should keep your eyes on the ball. This is getting heavy, can you hear the bass? Boom, I'm ready. Life is sweet as honey, yeah, this beat to treat like money. And this go overload, I'm into that, I'm good to go, I'm down, you know I glow. And let's go. 'Cause I'm in the stars tonight, so watch me bring the fire, set the night light. Hey, shining through the city with a little funky soul. So I'ma light it up like dynamite. Whoa, na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Life is dynamite. Na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Life is dynamite. Shining through the city with a little funky soul. So I'ma light it up like dynamite. Whoa, da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, eh. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, eh. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na, eh. Light it up with dynamite. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na, eh. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na, eh. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na, eh. Light it up with dynamite. 'Cause I'm in stars tonight, so watch me bring the fire, set the night alight. Perfect. Welcome back, everybody. We've obviously lost a couple of people, but I do want to say a note of appreciation to those of you who actually stayed on, and beyond that, actually, added some ideas into the Jamboard as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to collate them, and then we'll probably send a summary note to everyone in terms of the ideas that's come out. I wanted to wrap up today's part one of today's session with really talking about this, right? So let's talk about creating inclusive, diverse, and equitable startup ecosystems
These are just some of the steps that at least at 500 Startups we've done, and also we've seen our ecosystem builders take as well. When we talk about inclusive, it is not enough for entrepreneurial support organizations to just claim that all are welcome. Inclusion requires deliberate intent. Stakeholders must gain cultural competence and must be willing to develop and be guided by metrics that accurately reflect who is being served in order to better understand who may be left out and why. When we talk about diversity, in order to really achieve true diversity, we must be intentional about understanding the varied and unique attributes of multiple populations and be willing to integrate these understandings into our program development and offering so that no one is really left out. And lastly, when we talk about equity, entrepreneurs, this is really a systemic inequity that has put them behind the curve in spite of their talent and skill. So creating equity in ecosystems will mean that entrepreneurial support must be willing to make up for this by allotting equal, if not a higher percentage of funds to programs that foster inclusion. So with that, I wanted to really just close off. I won't show a lot of this, but really, when we look at 500 Startups, through our years of experience and validated by recent research that we did in the US, these are some of the 6 key elements. So same chart, but slightly different words, but related. 6 key elements or tools to have a thriving startup ecosystem. The first is strategy, so creating direction, alignment, and commitment around the vision for the ecosystem. The second is investment. So how do you establish, attract, manage, or advance existing investments? Platforms, attracting startups, talent, academics, advisors, mentors, and strategic partner. Education, how do we train and develop entrepreneurs, investors, and corporates? Education supports the acceleration and sustainment of entrepreneurs, investors, and corporates in the system and provide greater assurance of success. Then we have the corporates. Corporates invest, acquire, partner, or buy products and services from startups and really helps them gain financial autonomy and sustainability. And finally, governments. So governments provide incentives, policy, support, and partnership. And really having an integrated partnership with the government will be key to drive and sustain the ecosystem. So where do you start? If any one of you are thinking about building a startup ecosystem, where do you start? It doesn't matter so much as long as all the 6 core areas are activated. But if you did want to prioritize, based on our research, here are 3 key ones. Firstly, creating a cohesive plan to attract the stakeholders. Secondly, building and growing strong early stage startup programs. And thirdly, providing access to networks and resources for entrepreneurs. So for 500 Startups, we can join forces with you and build these by leveraging on each of our unique areas of experience, expertise, and networks. We actually do have a startup ecosystem maturity diagnostic here, but what I'm going to ask is that just in the interest of time, I will run a poll, and if any of you actually want access to that quiz earlier on to measure the startup maturity, the maturity levels of a startup ecosystem, just answer yes in the poll, and I will actually reach out to you and provide you with the link to that startup maturity assessment tool. So this is just a very quick poll as to whether or not you'd like me to send you this, the quiz, and whether or not you'd like to chat in terms of building startup ecosystems. And then we're going to take a short break. And when we come back at 4:40 p.m. Singapore time, so that's in 5 minutes, ADB Ventures will be leading the next session. And please stay put because we have a few really exciting startup entrepreneurs who will be sharing about what they've been doing in order to build a resilient post-pandemic ecosystem. And thank you so much to all of you who have stayed with us here today. And I look forward to seeing more of you in the next segment of this evening. So we will start in 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. I think we're going to start in a few minutes, give everyone maybe 1 or 2 minutes. And I hope everyone can hear me right now. This is Daniel from ADB Ventures. But maybe give everyone 1 or 2 minutes before we kick off the session in case people have to go and run and get some coffee or something. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the SEADS symposium. And we will now have a session around startups and how they contribute to building resilience through innovation. Let's very quickly about myself and ADB Ventures. So my name is Daniel Hersson. I work at ADB Ventures. So ADB Ventures is a newly launched, you can call it an impact tech fund, set up focusing on helping startups in Asia and beyond to scale their solutions across Asia that can have both a financial and a development impact. And ADB Ventures is focusing very much on the early stage startups, and we are working with startups and other stakeholders across Asia. And at any point of time, of course, we would love to engage both with startups and other investors across Asia, and looking forward to build relationships. But rather than talking more about ADB Ventures and myself, we have a great session ahead of us, and I would like to get into that. The session has really 3 parts of it. First, we will hear from 500 startups, which we are co-organizing this session with, and we're very grateful to all their support and help. We will hear from Vishal talking about 500 startups and their role in the region and their experience during COVID. Following that, we will hear from a number of startups. We have 4 fantastic startups from Philippines, Indonesia, India, and Sweden. And they're all played a different role in enabling a more resilient society. And during the last 6-9 months, I know all of them actually has been back in the trend and actually been growing quite significantly. So it'll be very interesting to hear their perspective of COVID and the impact on both their business and the broader ecosystem. And finally, to close it off, we would like to have a more of a discussion, an open-ended discussion with these entrepreneurs and with Vishal, as well as with the audience, where we can dig a little bit deeper into these different experiences. A couple of housekeeping rules before we kick off. The first thing is, if you do want, please feel free to add, on Zoom, obviously your name, but also you can rename yourself to your name and also add the organization. That might enable people to, if they want to contact you and chat with you during the presentations. The other thing I would like to add is that we will also post a follow-up form in the chat group later on at the end of the session, both for you, the audience, to provide feedback on the session, but also if you want to contact any of the entrepreneurs or us at ADB Ventures or 500 Startups, you can use that feedback or follow-up form. So please stay to the end and please fill in that form. We also will have some links that we will share for this form. So please fill in that form, because one purpose of this session is not just to have a conversation, but also to establish some new networks and connections. Next, I would really like to hand over to Vishal for 500 Startups, who will give us a little bit overview. For those who doesn't know, I mean, I think we all know 500 Startups is one of the most active VCs in the world. It's headquartered out of Silicon Valley, invested in several thousand startups, well, many of which you know. They're now a global brand. Vishal is managing all the investment in Southeast Asia, where I think they've invested in at least 200 companies, including famous ones like Grab and Carousel. So without further ado, let me hand over to Vishal and 500 Startups.
Thanks, Daniel. And thank you for having me over here. If you give me a second, I'm just going to share my screen and the presentation that I'm going to give. Are you all able to see my screen? I just need to know that I'm sharing the right thing.
Yeah, I think so. I can see it.
Okay, fantastic. It can be quite embarrassing if sometimes your WhatsApp or your email or, the latest, Emily in Paris episode shows up instead of whatever it is you're supposed to be presenting. So good to know that I'm on the right track.
Lately around that, but good luck.
It's nice to meet everyone over here. And thank you for making the time to listen to this presentation. My name is Vishal and I'm a partner at 500. I run the funds and I call them the Durians funds that invest all across Southeast Asia. We've invested in over 200 early stage companies all across the region, primarily in Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, but also in Vietnam, in Thailand, in the Philippines, and newer markets in Southeast Asia as well. We invest early when founders have just started developing their product, and we support them with not only capital, but an ecosystem and support to really help them build and scale over time. And from the time that I'd started with Durians back in 2014 or 2015, we went from an ecosystem with $0 billion companies to now where we have, I think, 11 or 12 companies that are worth over $1 billion in Southeast Asia and some over 10 billion. So the startup ecosystem across Southeast Asia has gone from being something like a sleepy backwater just 5 years ago to really exploding on the global stage as something with great prominence and the fastest growing internet economy in the world. And the reason I bring up this is because I think it ties in very strongly to the topic that we're here talking about in the second part, which is resilience. And what does it mean to build resilient startups and a resilient ecosystem, especially during a time like COVID? I was initially going to give a talk about, all of the cool areas that I thought were hot and a lot of money is going into, but rather than talk about that, we have some brilliant startups that are going to be presenting after that. They can give you firsthand information on those sectors. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out a little and really talk about what's happening on perhaps a larger level and a few guesses as to why it's happening, because that might inform better how you make your own decisions relating to investments and how you view and look at startups. So when we entered the COVID era in February of this year or March of this year, depending on where you were and how quickly the lockdown took place in your countries, it seemed like a great period of uncertainty. We had no idea how long this was going to last for, how our lives were going to be changed, how we would live and work. And I'm guessing many of us thought it would last just perhaps a few weeks, and then a few weeks became a month, and a month became a few months. And now we're in a new normal of operating. We're operating under a very different paradigm. And all of us are wondering, well, at least in the startup or the venture ecosystem, how does this pan out in the longer time? How are things going to change for us? And the remarkable thing about human beings is that you forget that you may have gone through similar experiences like this in the past, maybe not exactly the same, but perhaps analogous. And you can draw on the lessons that you've learned from that and extrapolate in some way where you're going to be at the end of it. So if you looked, if all of you remembered what SARS was like back in 2003 and 2004, there was a very robust venture or global venture ecosystem that took place at that time, not in Southeast Asia, but really in the US, really in China. And what you saw is that there was a little bit of a dip over the period of a couple of years while SARS was going on. But learning from that pandemic, you see that the bounce back happened, and it happened with strength after COVID, after SARS took place. Zika wasn't very much of a thing or a pandemic that happened globally, but it's yet another sort of like data point or decision point we can reflect back as human beings of a pandemic that affected some parts of the world, and look how it affected venture investing or funding. And the same thing happened. You see a dip, and then there's quite a significant bounce back after that. even if you compare it with recessions like the 2008 Great Depression, there was a dip in valuations, a dip in fundraising, a dip in the number of startups being born slightly in 2008. But if you take a slightly longer view of the time horizon and go not just over the next year or two where it immediately bounced back, but over a 10-year period, we are now living in an era where trillion-dollar companies are technology companies, driven by whatever forces make technology companies large, which is digitization and the resilience of a movement online and to devices and to mobile and to using new forms of technology to live, to work, to play. And even if fundraising rounds take longer during a period of COVID, which is very relevant for startups and relevant to their resilience, we see that it eventually bounces back. One of the most remarkable things that people forget about times of resilience or times of hardship is that some of the biggest and strongest companies that we have in the ecosystem today were born during those times of crisis, during pandemics, during recessions. So if you look at the names on these sheets, Slack, WhatsApp, Twilio, Airbnb, Tumblr, Dropbox, the apps that are on the screens of your phones or most of your phones on a daily basis, they were birthed at a time when you thought would be the worst time to start a new venture or company. And I'm sure many of your friends, your relatives, your colleagues, or people that you're working with are asking you, is now a good time to start a company? And the answer seems to be yes, but it really depends on what exactly it is you're going to be doing. So how do we extrapolate all of these decision points that we know to what's happening over here in Southeast Asia? The remarkable thing about the region that we live in over here is that much of the venture activity only started to boom after the recession in 2008. So if you look at how things span till 2008, 2009, you've basically got about 30 to 50 deals that are taking place a year. And then from 2010 onwards, a remarkable thing happened. You have an explosion of funds that come onto the scene, an explosion of deals that takes place. And in 2019, there were 550 new startups that were invested in our region. It's a remarkable thing. So you've gone from 50 in 2010 to 500 in 2019. It's because the ecosystems only emerged after the Great Recession. One of the most interesting things about that, and if you're familiar with the concept of dry powder, is that a lot of funds were raised over the last couple of years to fund these new deals that are coming. As the startup ecosystem continues to thrive, as more companies continue to be funded, more money gets raised to invest in these opportunities as there seems to be more success in the ecosystem. And as a result of that, we have $3.9 billion as of the first quarter this year, sitting uninvested in funds targeted towards Southeast Asian venture. That's a significant amount of capital that needs to go somewhere. And so that gives you a snapshot of where we're at in Southeast Asia. It was growing very, very rapidly as an ecosystem, and we're sitting on a great deal of money. If you look at the period just before COVID, January, 31 new deals, 160 million. February, 35 deals, 1.1 billion. March, 26 deals, $1.3 billion invested. Those are just some of the logos of companies in our portfolios that have raised, but there were many, many more companies that actually raised a total of $2.6 billion in the first quarter of 2020. This was the run-up to the lockdowns that were taking place. When we went into Q2, an additional $3 billion was raised. So total number of deals from January till June 2020 was 315 companies invested in, a total of $5.6 billion. If you include the $2.6 billion from Q1 and the $3 billion from Q2. So when you look at this, it seems quite strong. It seems quite resilient, even though there's a drop in the numbers or the volume of capital that's being invested in a number of companies. And although there's a decline in Southeast Asia and the number of deals that is taking place, it's a lot less when you compare to other markets and you compare it globally. So Southeast Asia was at a very unique position. A lot of capital, strong growing ecosystem, macros in the right place. And even though there was a COVID hit, it seems to be a lot less than other markets. Now for Q3, I apologize, there should be a graphic on the right side, but it's not displaying properly. For this particular quarter, I think it's going to be quite telling. And although deal volumes are supposed to have dropped compared to last year in Q3, there's been a phenomenal amount of new funds that have been raised. These are just a snapshot. Sequoia raises 1.35 billion for India and Southeast Asia. There are a number of new venture firms that have started in Indonesia and Malaysia. There are a lot of round sizes that are taking place close to 100 million. This is in the last 3 months, in the last quarter. So when you look at things in aggregate over what is happening in the ecosystem, it doesn't look as damning as you would think. One interesting factor, I think, that is driving some of this trend, and I apologize, they seem like a few disjointed points, but I just want to make this point on why Southeast Asia is again a net recipient of all of this, is that the US and China are at loggerheads right now with each other about technology and the acceptance of Chinese capital. But Chinese money has to go somewhere. Southeast Asia has been a natural port of call for a lot of Chinese investment, whether it's through the big conglomerates like Alibaba, or whether it's through funds that are looking at investing in the region. But it's not just China. The US is now starting to compete on a global stage with Chinese capital to get into these great deals and great companies around the world. And Southeast Asia actually is becoming a bit of a battleground for this to take place. And so when you look at what's happening in Southeast Asia, there's already a lot of capital. Entrepreneurship is rising despite COVID, and there are a lot of countries that are vying to get into deals. Things are actually quite, especially if you take a longer term view, resilient for the region in the longer run. So it depends on whether your outlook is 1 year, is it 2 years, or is it 5 years? In the longer run, I think it prevails. The last thing I'd share with you is this, which is there are many ways in which you can look at what's happening in the ecosystem. And I think taking a longer term view is a lot more perhaps aligned with the concept of resilience. Things will survive even though there seems to be a bump right now. I show you this graph because it gives you a glimpse of how we look at companies. And the very simple takeaway from the graph is this. There's some companies that are going to benefit from what's happening because of a rapid adoption of certain types of technologies, and more importantly, from changes in certain types of human behavior. There are other companies that are going to see a pause that takes place, whether it is travel, whether it is private transport, whether it is energy, oil and gas. And there are others that are going to need a complete reinvention of the way that we do things. And so what I encourage everyone putting on the hats of resilience is looking at whatever's happening in the longer run. What are the categories that the companies you're looking at or working with or partnering with fall into? And how do you ensure that you are focusing your time on the ones that have an accelerated future and are reinvention ready, and not just the ones that are seeing a temporary bump because of COVID or that need to be on pause or die because of it? I'm going to end with this graphic. It's one of my favorite. It's by Hokusai. I even have the book behind me. It's by Hokusai's painting, The Great Wave of Kanagawa. And when you look at this painting, I think it reminds me a lot of the times that we're living in, which is we think they're extremely turbulent. COVID has put our lives in complete disarray in some aspects, and we don't know what to expect in the world. And it very much resembles the waves that you see and the boats being thrown by the waves. But this painting is not about the waves. It is about Mount Fuji in the background as a symbol of permanence amidst the chaos of what happens on a temporary basis. The waves of COVID and the waves of pandemics and the waves of recessions will come and go. But if you are investing in technology and this future of digitization and believe that that is the trend towards which humanity is taking, then that mountain is really what should give you some peace of mind in thinking about how you build resilience among your companies. Thank you very much for listening. Please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is right there. I promise I check it, occasionally, and I'd love to engage you in any further conversation that you have.
Thank you so much, Vishal. That was a great scene setting presentation. And I still remember you saying $3.9 billion of dry powder in Southeast Asia. So entrepreneurs out there, there's a lot to play for. You just need to ride a wave and get to the mountain. But next, from that terrific presentation and overview from Vishal, we now have 4 entrepreneurs from different parts of Asia and different parts of the world indeed. KonsultaMD from Philippines, I mentioned, Quizzer from Sweden, Zypp from India, and Dude Happe from Indonesia itself. And each of them is going to present a little bit about the company, a little bit of what they're doing. And later on, we will have an opportunity to have a discussion with entrepreneurs and Vishal, more specifically around COVID, both from the experience of being an entrepreneur, but also from the opportunity it has presented to them and their startups. So next, I would like to hand over to Glenn from KonsultaMD, who are transforming the healthcare sector in the Philippines and beyond. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you, Daniel. Am I coming in okay?
Absolutely. I can hear you well.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Glenn. I'm the Chief Operating Advisor of KonsultaMD, and I'm here to talk a little bit about what KonsultaMD is all about. And we've been been around for a long time now, around 5 years. And I guess it took COVID for people to figure out how important it is to have healthcare. And the problem statement that we have is, 6 out of 10 Filipinos will never have met a doctor, seen a doctor in their lifetime, right? And would have eventually moved on. Access either through price, payment method, geography, and time, especially in the most rural areas in the Philippines. Us being an archipelago makes that extremely difficult. I myself had personal experience about that a long time ago in an outreach where there was no hospital nearby in a very dire situation. In comes KonsultaMD. Consulta is kind of like a Filipino Spanish term, consult, obviously. And MD obviously stands for medical doctor. Basically, it's a telehealth provider, the most affordable one in the country. We are open 24/7 through phone or video. We're the lowest, most affordable, as low as 2 pesos a day. That's like 0.041 US, right? We have direct to consumers. We work with LGUs, local government units, and also enterprise clients. Basically, only KMD works in all emerging market use cases where you don't have credit cards, because we can charge through your airtime credits on subscription. If you don't have a smartphone, that's fine. If you don't have Wi-Fi, that's okay. You don't have data, you just need a phone call, right? And you can even use a landline, right? That's also perfectly fine. Pretty much where we are today, we have about 800,000 paying customers across consumer, enterprise, and government units. And again, we're 24/7. And during the start of the lockdown here in the Philippines, which started around March, around April, we've seen a surge on our calls by 500%. And we just kind of supported the government both at the local level and at the national level at the same time. And a little background, KonsultaMD is a joint venture between 917 Ventures, a Globe Telecom company, incubator, and Salud Mexico, Salud Interactiva from Mexico. So yeah, that's who we are, and happy to spend more time later on in discussions and questions for later, which would be more interesting. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Glenn, and for that introduction to KonsultaMD, and looking forward to dig a bit deeper about your COVID experience later on during the panel. Next, I think it's Zypp, Rashi from Zypp. I think we can find her here on all this Zoom participants. Rashi, you there?
Very much. Yeah. Hi. So hi, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much for having me here. And a great thanks to ADB Ventures and all the organizers to conduct this webinar. Yeah. So to tell you more about my company, Zypp Electric, it is a 3-year-old startup which is based out of Delhi NCR, the capital city of India. Well, we are the largest last mile delivery electric mobility company, which is tech and IoT enabled. So today in India, we have 2 major problems when it comes to last mile delivery. One is that we have almost more than 5 lakh riders who are running with petrol vehicles. And the other one is that last mile delivery is almost 50% cost of logistics for e-commerce. So, one of our USP is to solve both these concerns and make last mile delivery eco-friendly, pollution-free, and affordable via our electric vehicles. So we started a journey with one hub of Amazon, and today we are live in almost 10 hubs, each of all the big e-commerce companies, being it Amazon, Flipkart, all the big e-grocery companies like Big Basket, Sodi, Apollo, Modern Bazaars, which are the famous stores in India. Also, we have an on-demand platform which is being used by 200 plus restaurants and small merchants, for their last mile delivery needs. As far as the expansion is concerned, currently we are live in 5 cities. We have around 880 scooters live, and we are looking to go 10x by the end of next year. We have already delivered 5 lakh plus shipments to our customers since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic. Also, we have, the AI/ML algorithms which we are using in our tech to make the riders and bikers utilization effective, and in return lower down the cost of our last mile delivery services for the end consumer. Our main focus is to look at last mile delivery with an EV solution, and thus I think we have come a long way, in terms of a right product market fit. The idea is to make our scooters so robust and well that they are ready for the roads. They should have good, battery swapping capabilities that they can run for 140 kilometers in one go. We have also tied up with a lot of fintech companies and OEMs to keep ourselves asset light so that we can expand rapidly. See, the market in India is huge. We are spread across 500 cities in last mile delivery business. And I think that this is a great opportunity. Currently, we are growing at a speed of 20% month on month from the last 6 months, especially during this COVID time. And the idea is to grow, 10x, by the end of next year. So currently we have raised $2.8 million through our angels and a very respectable Indian fund called IM Fund. And we are looking to raise 8 million round in our next Series A round of funding to expand in major cities of India with our EV mission. So that's about us.
Thank you, Rashi. It's fantastic to hear. And of course, we had some conversation and, to learn about Zypp and the way you transformed it last month, particularly in this year, has been, it's fantastic. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Quizzer, from Jens Helmersson from Quizzer in Sweden, and how they are enabling more resilient supply chains and just generally transforming the sustainability of our supply chain. So over to Jens.
Thank you very much. So I want to start by saying thank you also to the first session on female founders. I thought it was really inspiring. We have a female founder in Quizzer as well. Me and Sophie Nordstrom founded Quizzer after getting to know each other living in Bangladesh. We saw the challenges in global supply chains and we needed to support companies and factories to train workers in a better way. So we wanted to build ability in factories to be resilient and to have their own ability to be proactive instead of reactive. So I think what the key is knowledge. How do you become resilient as a person? You need to have knowledge. And I think this is valid also for what is happening right now in the COVID, post-COVID and during COVID times. We have, of course, a COVID solution also that we are able to scale out to the factories that we are working with. And I think that this is just putting a spotlight also on the challenges of too much traveling to factories, of a very audit-driven supply chain. And I think that we need to be able to go much more digital and drive abilities in factories to a much bigger extent. We've been around for 7 years. I think our time is truly coming right now. We see a lot of interest both from investors and from others. And I think that this is our time. We have a proven case. We have 2 of the world's top 10 companies as clients, and we fit into a lot of categories that Vishal was talking about as well: supply chains, digital media, education, supply chain. So I think that the time for Quizzer is right now, and we have a solution where we can drive scalability, where we can drive adoption to every person working in a factory on all the critical knowledge that they need to have. We're looking for a potential expansion round to continue to drive our first mover advantage, and we're looking for key stakeholders that can also help us as a business, not only with money, but with knowledge. So I look forward to talk more about what we can support in COVID times later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens. And thank you for that overview. And yeah, absolutely looking forward to dig deeper once we get to the panel time. And by the way, I also I realized of the 4 companies we have today, 3 have female founders, which I think shows that, there is this new emerging wave, and hopefully COVID, with all its negatives, also the positive is a new generation of entrepreneurs, particularly female entrepreneurs, may be emerging. The last one, as someone I know very well, and we've spoken a lot, is Sarah from Gnowbe. So over to Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much, Daniel, for the opportunity to ADB. So yes, Daniel said, we've been talking a lot. I'm Sarah, founder of Gnowbe. And what we are is we're an e-payment for the unbanked. And that is a huge problem in Indonesia because over 130 million Indonesian adults don't have bank accounts. So you can imagine this makes payments very difficult, and even more difficult if it's mass payments. So I faced this problem myself when I was the finance director of Millennium Challenge Account Indonesia, and I managed a $600 million fund to reduce poverty in Indonesia. And even though we had the bank with the largest network, the only way to get the money across was to carry it in sacks, put them in envelopes, and give them one by one. And I thought that was just insane. So I said, okay, there has to be a solution. So I quit my job and I founded Gnowbe as a solution to this problem. So right now we work with our B2B clients. We provide them with an e-payment system for the unbanked, so they would be able to distribute efficient, safe, accurate, safe, accountable mass payments to the unbanked. And we're currently the leading player in digital aid distribution. And we're very fortunate that within this year, we grew 50 times, not 50%, 50 times. We achieved a gross transaction value of $2.4 million and distributed to over 90,000 recipients in 2020. So how we were able to do this is because the way we're designed is we're able to cater to anyone. So our users expand between the ages of 5 to 80 years old, and even the disabled. So all our users simply need to do is go to their neighborhood shop, show their face, enter their PIN, and shop. So there's no bank, no card, no phone required. And the great thing about this is that while we're growing, we also boost the economy. We doubled and even tripled the sales of these micro stores who are our agents. And for us, digital aid distribution is just a start. We're moving into commercial payments because the way we see it is that these our agents, which are these micro stores, we're preparing them to be the financial hubs within that area, and that includes like even remote areas as well. So right now, I mean, we're working with large organizations. For example, we work with one of our biggest clients is World Vision, and we worked with MasterCard and HSBC. And we work with anyone who needs to make mass payments to the unbanked. So right now, whether you're a nonprofit organization that needs to distribute aid to the unbanked, or you work with farmers, if you're a bank or micro lender or a lender that needs to make micro loans to unbanked supplier to unbanked people, or companies that need to pay to unbanked suppliers, for example, like smallholder farmers, or if it's a factory that needs to make payroll to low-level workers, of which they're still doing in cash. Those are the people that we are working with, and I would love to hear if anybody has that need. And right now we are just closing a $500,000 round of investment, and we're seeking for a $3 million raise next year. So hopefully, hopefully that continues to go well even after COVID. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, to provide us that overview and the sort of the role of Gnowbe and providing this unbanked with access to finance. Now I would like, if everyone, this is like all virtual, of course, but all the entrepreneurs and of course Vishal and myself, it would be great to have a little discussion and really hear from entrepreneurs and from Vishal himself as well around experience in the last, say, 9 months, but also looking forward, and really discuss resilience on several levels. Both resilience and entrepreneur. I mean, it's been a tough year, I think, for everyone here, of all these entrepreneurs. And what does it mean to be a resilient entrepreneur? And how do you deal with a situation where the world stops and changes? And so what has been your experience around operating during COVID? And then the other resilience, which is, how do we make the society more resilient? And how have your products and solutions changed to adopt to this new normal and to the need for a more resilient economy and society overall? So both that kind of like a more introspective view on what it means to be a resilient startup, but then, how do you benefit from the world's need for more resilience? But maybe we can start from on the inside. How has it been from the inside of your startup in the last 6-9 months? What has been the roller coaster? And I'd love to hear. And I think I'm going to open up to the floor of entrepreneurs here. What has been your experience?
If it's all right, I can start.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that it's been challenging, of course, trying to figure out how to work with your colleagues. We are normally a company where we have offices, we meet, we have a lot of meetings, but you had to kind of revamp your company into a digital company, of course. But I think except for that, it's really putting a spotlight on people, and it's putting a spotlight on the needs for people to be educated in a proper way, which is truly driving our business forward. So I think that I'm really happy to see, because when I'm looking at the SDGs, for example, I feel that there's been a massive focus on environment prior to this, but I see that this is shifting now, and we're talking a lot about social compliance as well. So for us as a company, it's been a great driver for more business and opportunities. So I'm really glad to see also that we can support many people with more knowledge.
Interesting. So what has been, Rashi, from you in India? What has been, I mean, of course, we look at the numbers, we've seen what happened in India on distance. How has it been from the inside of a startup? I think you might be on mute right now. Wait, I think I can, yeah. There we go.
Yeah. So see, I think when there's a challenge, one has to see that as an opportunity. And that's the mantra Zypp has. So, day one, when in India, there was a complete lockdown on 23rd of March, we saw that there was a sudden, demand for last mile delivery, because from a small kirana shop to any restaurant, any merchant wanted to go digital, wanted to, have a service to provide to the end consumer. So, our team came forward, they were standing on ground to serve the nation. That was a huge challenge that came to us, but we took it as an opportunity. We onboarded 25 merchants through our, on-demand platform. We hired hundreds of riders, and we delivered the basic essentials, medicines, groceries, to all the end to all the end customers, during that time. So I think as Zypp Electric, we really, came forward and did what was needed, what was supposed to be done by us, and it was actually was a boom for us. We grew in leaps and bounds during that time.
Very interesting to hear the different perspectives there and how you turn that kind of difficult time into something positive. Glenn, I mean, it'd be interesting, of course, I'm also sitting here in the Philippines myself. There's a blue background here because, there's a messy apartment in the background, really, right? And we had a long sort of, not necessarily lockdown here, but there's been a long period of not normal, right, in the Philippines. How has it been for you at KonsultaMD? And I know you're operating across the Philippines.
Yeah. For us, and it applies to pretty much almost all the startups we touch under the 917 Ventures umbrella, is the team is number one, right? The team that brought KonsultaMD to where it was before 2020 it's not the same team you'll need moving forward. And when COVID hit, that just magnified the situation. And then I just actually just took over around middle of the year. And first thing we did is to bring in a new set of people. And even though we grew 500% during the lockdown, the actual paying base didn't actually grow. Adoption was actually kind of slow. You would think that it was a given that it would follow, but the team just wasn't able to adapt quickly. Right now, with a whole new set of people that are more attuned to what people call as digital or more online, more in tune to what's happening around the nation, and also how digital and mobile helps. We're now able to capitalize and set ourselves for, I would say, really great success for the back half of the year all the way to next year. So that's number one. It's to me it's a flywheel. If you have the right people and capitalize on the opportunities, then you're able, because the mission is very clear on what we do: bring affordable healthcare to everyone. And if you bring in the right team, you do a good job, then you're able to really bring that into a reality at a much more larger scale. And our unfair advantage here is really, being backed up by a Globe Telecom, not talking about technically funding, but you have the backing of a 90 million customer base, right? And we call it pretty much jet fuel, wherein any startup would have a benefit of just suddenly growing into the millions, right? In terms of consumer base adoption, through the backing of a mobile operator. So those are the elements that works for us. But at the very core, your parent or your investor, whether it be in cash or in kind, will not support you if you don't have the right team in place. So that's the first thing we tried to solve, or we did solve.
It's interesting, this link to the human. I mean, you all touch upon it, Jens, as well, and how it really pushes the team, and you start realizing who you need and where the gaps are, maybe in a way that sort of you wouldn't necessarily, at least face in that kind of short time frame. Sarah, I mean, you've been growing 50 times over in terms of your business in the last 6 months plus. What has it been from your perspective? I mean, what's been the learnings during this period?
I think, first of all, at first we were probably kind of like shocked like everyone else. But then once we saw what this pandemic has kind of like given to us is like, it's basically a new reality that, again, what was said, what was before and what is now has completely changed, and kind of also challenge people to really change their behaviors, because the way it was done before does not work anymore. And then so at first, I think we had to take like about a week to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? Because we still did a lot of things manually before. But then what we realized, like, hey, this is actually giving us an opportunity where before we were expanding to places where we could physically go. But then we figured out, like, hey, wait a minute, it doesn't even matter where we are. Everything's done online. We've been working online, working from home since middle of March. And then so when we realized that, it was like, oh man, suddenly we went into areas we've never gone before. So before we were only kind of like in Jakarta and West Java. And then suddenly now we're smack in the middle of like Sulawesi, in Bali and Lombok, and it at almost no cost. And we were like, oh my God, this is like the greatest thing ever. And then so using kind of like what began as something as was a challenge, and then we realized just like how much opportunities it opened, and that was really mind blowing for us. And that's how we got to 50%, because like, okay, exactly, now we know how to get it, and we got to technology to adapt directly with this. And the good thing is also from the users that were probably like, you wouldn't think of working with micro store owners in the middle of nowhere. And now they're on Zoom, and now they just take it as kind of like a normal life, which was not possible before. So I think it opens up really great opportunities that I think is just like, it's not open just to us, but it's open to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, like the new reality, what it means. You know, people are adopting technology, you know, including myself, in a way I would never have done before, right?
Yep.
You know, how we sort of compressed 5 years of technology adoption into 6 months, something like that. But we could get back to that. Two things. First to the audience, and thanks everyone for listening in and staying. I know it's late in the afternoon. If you do have any questions for anyone specifically on the panel, or general question, but ideally specifically to one of the participants, please type the question in the chat, in the Zoom chat, and we will try to direct those questions to the panelists later on. Lastly, I'm talking about a question around the resilience. I mean, I would like to ask you, Vishal, as a fellow investors, how was it for you? Because I do remember, you know, that the shock to the investment community in the first few months of COVID, everyone reevaluating their portfolio. You couldn't go around and do the due diligence the same way. How did it impact 500 startups from the inside?
So I can speak about how it impacted the funds that I run over here in Southeast Asia. And I think that that'll give you a sense of what the impact was globally. I think those who know me well enough over many years know that I was rarely actually in Singapore. I spend most of my time in airplanes anyway. And so I was very used to, and my team was very used to, conducting diligence through video calls, using distributed technologies to work. We were already quite distributed as a team around the world. So the adoption to a new way of working post-COVID, especially in assessing and speaking or meeting with entrepreneurs through video or through other means, wasn't something that needed to be a new behavior that we needed to adopt to, because we were always making investment decisions off video calls, just because of the fact that I was never really in one place, and neither was my partner with whom, you know, I make the investment decisions as well. So that's one part of it. The second part is, I'd say this: I think that we definitely slowed down our investment activity a little bit over here in Southeast Asia. We were doing on average a new investment every week. And during the period of COVID, I think that we did a new investment every 2 weeks instead. Now we're sort of like back to ramping it up to full steam as well at the consistent investment pace that we were pre-COVID. And many people have asked me, why? Is it because we were uncertain, or were we not confident what was taking place that made us, you know, less bullish about investing during this COVID period? And you know, it comes down to something really quite simple, which is that investors are human beings like everyone else. So the reason why investors aren't deploying capital is probably because, like everyone else, you're first worried about your own well-being and safety, like physiological, psychological safety during a time like this. The COVID pandemic was quite unique because of the lockdowns, the safety and security of your families and getting everything in order, whether it is, you know, for your kids, or I don't have kids, so I can't say that. But for many people, it was simple things like this: setting their houses in their own bottom of the pyramid in order. Then you start to look at your own portfolio and make sure, is everyone okay? How are my companies doing? Are people in need of more capital? Do they need any type of support? And then you go hunting for opportunities. And I think it just took a little bit of lead time for that to stack up. And it's not just true for us, but it's true for everyone, which is why I think there was a slight difference in it. The one thing that I think I do miss is having conversations in real time in person with entrepreneurs. It's fundamentally a very people-driven and people-centric business, especially early stage investing. Even at the later stage, I guess, maybe a little bit less so, but having that interaction, I think, and the degree to which you want to have it and not be on a constant roulette of Zoom calls is something that I miss.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Virtual coffee is not really the same thing. Please, to the audience, all the participants, I mean, please feel free to ask questions and don't hold back. Of course, there is an opportunity to link up again through the feedback form and follow-up form. But please also take the opportunity to ask some difficult questions to this panelist. I'm sure they can take it. But looking forward now, and looking outside at the clients, the products you're selling, the new normal, the new reality. What do you think? What is the biggest changes both to your product, but also to your sector overall, that are going to be the lasting? Looking sort of 12 months ahead, what do you think is going to be? What have you done to adapt to the new world, and what's going to be most defining part of that new world for your particular sector? Thinking beyond what the really new normal means from business opportunity and the way we do business. Anyone want to go first, or otherwise I might just pick?
I'll go ahead, I guess.
Okay, go Glenn.
Well, I want to know if it's an answer, but it's also part answer, part question.
Yes.
The COVID situation is also temporary, but at the same time permanent in that sense, right? So when you think about the growth areas during COVID, and e-commerce is one of them, telehealth or healthcare is one of them in some cases. There's also that short window, right? And then when people start going back to a sort of normal under a new normal context, when people start going out again, the question is, do they go back to their old ways? I'd rather, because the Filipino culture is a little bit different. Like, I'll go, for some weird reason, we feel we like to really inconvenience ourselves, and I'm sure you know this, Daniel, right? In the skyway or in the highways, right? They won't go through the trouble of getting a RFID pass. They'd rather fall in line for an added hour in traffic rather than getting a pass that saves them 40 minutes, right? And if the operator of the roads don't make it mandatory for that everybody has an RFID pass, nobody's going to do it. So the question, I guess, for us who are experiencing some kind of a boom, when people start going back out again, how many will stay in that new behavior, not having to see the doctor physically, right? And how many will just go back? Oh, I'd rather see the doctor, and fall in line again. So I think that's a big question for some of us. And to me, I think it sits within a behavior change. For telemedicine, I mean, it is telehealth. And I think the convenience story has to stick beyond after COVID, right? It's still better, safer, and less time consuming to be at home, call a doctor. You don't have to really go to a hospital or a clinic. An example would be, before Spotify became popular in the Philippines, people would argue, I'd still go to the pirated places and it's cheaper. What they forget, they pay $50 for parking, they pay $100 to get there, $100 to go home, right? And they pay another 150 to 200 pesos to buy a Jollibee meal. And now in Spotify, like, that's a fraction of, and you just stay home to get your music, right? So it's that kind of behavior that I think we need to figure out, as entrepreneurs during at this time. And I don't know if Vishal has some kind of view on what your investee companies are seeing in that. I'm sure you're seeing some data around it. So I'd like to hear from Vishal as well. Sorry, man.
No. It's a good segue, Vishal, before we jump into some others. I mean, do you see some evidence of stickiness? I mean, are we just adapting as a reaction because we have to, but will it last? I mean, what's your feeling having this kind of broader perspective on the world from the seat of an investor?
So I think this is like, Glenn, I agree with a lot of what you just said. I think for me, it comes down to this question, and this is a question I phrase it in my mind at least. How elastic do you believe human memory is? Or how short-lived do you believe human memory is? Is human memory and human psychology such that once, let us assume like in another month, they say lockdowns lifted, vaccines distributed, everyone go back to normal, that people forget that they lived in this bubble of time for the last 7 or 8 months, and how much of it is forgotten? I think some things will change, and the degree to which it changes depends on the degree of pain you have to go through between now and when things revert to a more normal way of doing things. So it's about behaviors, how behaviors change, and whether technology can really prompt a much more rapid and permanent change in that behavior. A friend of mine who owns quite a bit of commercial real estate in Singapore, we were talking about what the future of office space is like, and how no one really seems to be in the office, and the psychology of office workers getting used to being at home. And his view, and I thought it was quite interesting, is that I'm looking at it from the wrong perspective. He said that I shouldn't be looking at it from the perspective of the employees going to work and how they feel. I should be looking at it from the perspective of the 5 or 10 people in charge of these large organizations that employ tens of thousands of people, and what their decision is going to be on getting people back into the offices. So it's quite funny. I think that there are many dimensions in which you can look at it. The dimension of human memory and behavior, the dimension of power dynamics, and who can call the shots on whether things return to normal, or whether things return to the old way of doing things or a new way of doing things. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, think of Jens. I mean, you are working with some of these big corporations like H&M and others, and working through their supply chains, some of the most complicated parts of the global industry. I mean, what is your feeling on, the new reality? Is it a temporary new reality? Or are you seeing actually a broader shift from these large organizations, from the suppliers, the purchasers, etc.?
I see a shift, and I think that the stickiness is really here, and I believe that many companies was stuck to a certain extent in audit, being audit driven, where they audited factories, they sent people there, then they had to do consultant work in the factories in order to create change. All of a sudden COVID hits and nobody can travel to factories anymore, and I believe that this is really creating that shift. And since there are solutions already available like ours and others, where we can directly support companies and say that we can help you ensure worker rights are trained, that you can still create better engagement within factories, that you can work with any topic that we have on our agenda, modern slavery, wage management, all of these important topics that you need as a buyer. It's too easy right now to just fall in line and say that, okay, let me start working with your solution. Maybe I'll do less on-site visits. Maybe I'll do less consultancy work. And you also have a supply chain with factories that say, thank you for helping me to be proactive, and thank you for helping me proving through measurable results and data that I actually take responsibility. So I believe that the time has just come, and that the stickiness is here. So I would never say that I would thank COVID for showing up, but with it being here, we can always be happy of the opportunities that it shows. So I think that this in our segment and within the industry that we're working, I believe that it's sticking.
It's interesting. I mean, we're interested for Rashi, in India, the last mile delivery. I mean, is India now going to order online in the future, or is it temporary? Or are we going to see the queues again, etc.? What's your feeling?
Yeah. So see, e-commerce was growing in our country, no doubt, but I feel that COVID has definitely given it a spike. See, during the time of lockdown, the consumers were they didn't have much of a choice but to, do online shopping, to do online grocery purchase, and it definitely had a shift change in, a behavioral change in the way they have started shopping. They got a taste of it, India is a country of young people, who are more adaptable to changes, who are more inclined towards technology. Also, one fact which is very, very relevant for India is that we have, smartphones today with every individual. We have cheap internet, and it is growing with every passing day. So we can surely say this with confidence that for India, e-commerce, e-grocery, EVs are the future, and it's gonna grow in leaps and bounds. That is forgiven.
So in a way, you see it as something that was already happening, but accelerated through COVID.
Yes,
I mean, the behavioral
COVID
change
has actually given a spike to it, basically.
Interesting. Sarah, from your point of view, in Indonesia, do you see your model of serving the unbanked as something, that is just not an emergency issue? It's not just there for this period, but actually a way of living in the future for transferring, between different constituencies?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The thing is, there is no alternative solution for the 130 million unbanked Indonesians right now. But then before, people, especially with digital money, there's a reluctance of moving that way just because of people are used to their cash. People are used to the money and not as used to, like, okay, the concept of digital money is just too foreign. With this, what we're doing now is to suddenly like, oh, okay, it's just as good as money. It doesn't really matter whether I can touch it or not, but as long as it has value and it can actually buy something, it is a form of currency in a way that you can just use it just as good as money. And that is kind of like opening minds right now. So before, what we're providing is a solution to a problem we've already had before. And but now what COVID has done, it has kind of enabled people to go over the hump of seeing, oh, okay, now I understand what it means because they're actually experiencing it. And so now suddenly micro stores that they were not willing to accept digital money, now they see their neighbors like, oh yeah, I want that too. I want to triple my sales because of this. And they see that it's actual real money. It was actually funny before there were people that were giving fake phone numbers because they were thinking, oh yeah, we're scams or something. And then they saw the neighbors who actually gave their actual phone number get stuff. I was like, wait, that was the wrong phone number. And they came back to us. And then sounds like, and then so this got over that kind of almost, it was an imaginary block in the minds. And it's like, oh no, it's just money. It just has a different form. And so I think hopefully from here, people are now a lot more willing to change. And that we see that as long as people see the benefit, they get on board really quickly.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess over next, well, hopefully, within 6-12 months, things will hopefully come down. But interesting to see will be, what's left of our behaviors, right, and others and consumers' behaviors. What has been temporary shift versus a permanent accelerated shift? And of course, time would tell. But clearly, people here in the panel knows it better than anyone else and is out there every day. I think we're about to run out of time, but we have, I think we have 1 or 2 questions for the audience. I think one question was really to Vishal and generally to the panel around SDG. Whether we consider SDG as part of or a different SDG impact as part of your investment philosophy. But let me turn it around a bit, Vishal, and others too on the panel. During COVID, has things that before was considered to be impact become more mainstream? Like, for example, like Sarah's talking about financial inclusion, e-payments for the unbanked, education for certain segments, telehealth. Is there been a convergence on mainstream and impact investment during COVID? And will resilience drive even further convergence there? Is one question I have for Vishal. And then general as well, just interesting to hear if you as 500 startup, do you consider impact as being one of your lenses during your due diligence?
So it's an interesting question. And I think even if I were to reflect back on perhaps 2019 as a year, we saw many firms and funds sort of add an impact. I wouldn't even call it a lens, but perhaps even a veneer on top of how they were investing or looking at companies. I've seen some of the most like hardcore capitalists become impact-driven, ESG-focused investors with the flip of a switch. And I'm guessing that has much to do with the availability of capital or impact dollars for funds. Now, I think what is happening is that the word impact, the words SDG, I don't know, there seems to be a disturbance. The word impact, the word SDGs, the words ESG have been very vague until quite recently. And now where the conversation is shifting is that it's shifting to a place where there's a, I'm just going to pause, I believe.
Anyone maybe can mute if you, yeah, someone.
Yes, okay, there we go.
There we go.
I believe where it's moving towards is that these terms are losing the halo of vagueness that they had before, this year. When you can define more clearly what it means to invest with an impact lens, what it means when you say you have an ESG policy, or what it means when you're looking with SDG goals in mind when you invest, you are then able to say whether you can do it with legitimacy. So in 500, we do have a global ESG officer within 500, and some of our funds do invest with at least an ESG lens associated to it. And it's something that we are rolling out globally. And the reason we're doing it is because we've always been about, and you can see it from the type of activity that we engage in, we've never ever been a purely venture fund, right? We have an entire ecosystems business that runs around the entire sector, and it's really driven by uplifting economies and entrepreneurs all across the world. And so now what's been happening is that over the course of the last few years, we're in the process of formalizing how that manifests itself in the way that we look at deals and investments. Does this mean that we will not look at a company at all if we think that there is no ESG positive externality associated with it? I don't think that's the case, also because I think the breadth of what that concept involves has expanded quite significantly.
It's interesting, and just to add a little bit from the perspective of ADB Ventures, is more of an impact-focused venture capital fund. But what we noticed, of course, that we look at a lot of development, but we're realizing that a lot of these things that we might not have considered as being impact before, but now had a tremendous impact during COVID. For example, better supply chains, last mile logistics, access to financial services, things that were before not necessarily clearly defined as impact, has proven to have a very impactful role during the last 9 months, right? So for us, it's been very interesting to see that convergence of, really broadening definition of impact and really seeing evidence over the last 9 months of what can be defined as impact and really important for the Asian economy. And I think we run out of time now. And first of all, I would like to thank everyone on the panel for contributing, participating, and discussing, and I hope we can all stay in touch and work together. All the participants and audience, thank you for staying on. There is a feedback form that you can fill in if you want to meet or talk to any one of us, or you can just email us directly. I'm sure you can find a way to get hold of us. I would like to thank, of course, 500 Startup, Vishal and his team for helping organizing this session. It's been a great partnership and hope we can do more. Of course, I'm just talking here, but really there's been a lot of people in ADB Ventures, Jichu, Pang and others that have been helping, Jason, others that are helping organize this. So thank you everyone for that. Hope to see you all again, and please feel free to stay in touch and connect with us. With that, I would like to say goodbye and thank you to all. Have a good evening, wherever you may be.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.